evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Product PH online webinar. This evening, we're going to talk about how to manage a remote product team. I think this is a very timely topic, especially in this environment where many of us are working from home to flatten the curve because of COVID-19. So before we start, I'd like to share a bit about Product PH and what Product PH is all about, especially for those of you who are joining us for the first time. So Product PH is an organization in the Philippines where we seek to where our vision is to create world-class products from the Philippines, and the way we do that is being able to share knowledge. So in many of our meetups, we invite product experts, product leaders, product people who build product to kind of share their knowledge, share their experience, so we can all learn from each other. For this evening, we've invited a couple of guests from all over the region and also from other parts of the world. We'll start first with our first guest, who is a very accomplished product leader, and her name is Ms. Gaze Kasilag del Castillo, Head of Product Development of Edufied. Gaze, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, John. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ace Kasilag del Castillo. I am the head of product development of Edufied, and I'm also the founder of Work From Home Pinay.ph. So just to give you a background about Edufied, we are a blockchain-based credential verification system. So what we do is we help institutions, schools, training centers to lessen the claims of fake diplomas, fake certificates, fake credentials. And we are distributed. We are a remote team, and we are distributed in 3 countries. And then for Work From Home Pinay.ph, I am the founder, and I have a small community, a Facebook community, and also an Instagram and a blog, wherein I help Filipinas to successfully transition from working in an office to working from home. That's it. Thanks, John.
All right, great. Thank you, Gaze. And then our next panelist, all the way from Germany, is it, Andreas? So Andreas Gauster is currently product manager for Liquvido. Can you share more about what you do at Liquvido, Andreas?
Yeah, sure. Hey guys. Actually, I was surprised that you put the Germany flag on me because I'm a Filipino kind of at heart. I'm just stuck in Germany right now. So yeah, Liquvido is a Danish startup. We are actually fully remote-based mostly, except for salespeople. So everyone in tech and in product and so on, we all work remotely. What we do is we basically help companies currently just in Denmark, but soon all over Europe, to get paid with their invoices. So what our clients do is they integrate with an accounting system, and then they want to get paid by their clients. So basically what we do is we automate the entire process of getting your invoices paid. So sending out reminders, doing debt collection, doing lawsuits, all that kind of stuff to make sure that you get paid by your customer. And so we basically automate that so they don't have to do anything at all.
All right, great. And then also we invited YC Lian, who is I think you're based in Singapore, YC, is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
All right. Can you share more about what you do at Service Rocket? Yeah, I believe you're head of technology at Service Rocket.
Yeah, hi. I'm the techie of Service Rocket. Black is my happy color. You can see that from my webcam right now is black and white. I'm the head of both R&D as well as the IT team. It's an enterprise solutions company. We primarily focus on a few ecosystem. Some of them you might be familiar with, such as Atlassian products, as well as Facebook Workplace. We develop products on top of them. We also offer custom solutions and a broad range of services on top of these platforms. I'm glad to be invited. Thanks for bringing me here.
All right, great. And then last but not least, we have Tang Shet Shin, who is an agile coach based out of Malaysia. Can you introduce yourself, Tang?
Yes, thanks, John. First of all, hello, Philippines, and whoever else is out there watching. I was most recently head of agile practice at Sick Asia. You probably know us more with our consumer brands, JobStreet and JobsDB. So there, I had kind of reshaped the culture for high-performing teams through a lot of agile practices and agile ways of work. So forming teams, tribes, squads, and the like. Most recently, I've kind of just struck out on my own to be a full-time agile coach and trainer. So I'm with my own company now, Future Work, but I'm also a authorized IC Agile trainer. Back to you.
All right, great. So as you can see, we assembled really a powerhouse group of panelists. So we have entrepreneurs, we have product leaders, we have tech geeks who love the color black. So I'm sure this will be an interesting discussion tonight. What I really wanted to kind of understand first before we go into our topic really is I'm sure people are kind of curious how you got into your current roles. I want to understand like how you became, let's say, an entrepreneur. As say, you mentioned that you were originally an agile coach, but now you've decided to kind of go out on your own. What kind of prompted you to do that?
I think one of the things that agile and product people really share at heart, right, is we are problem solvers. Right. And I think one of the ways I've kind of landed myself in my previous role and the state I am in right now is to constantly look for problems to solve. I'm reminded of a conversation I had this morning with my mentor where he was coaching me in a way to say, every problem is a puzzle that when you solve it, you get a prize. Right. And that really struck a chord with me because product people solve product puzzles, engineers solve engineering puzzles, and agile people solve people problems or people puzzles, right? And I see this whole situation right now with COVID-19 and the like is a puzzle for us to solve. That going forward, these kind of events will probably be more common, maybe even normal, and whoever is able to solve these kinds of puzzles will basically win. Right, so I do see that what's happening right now is not in this current crisis is actually an opportunity for someone to crack, right? And I didn't intend to strike out and start my own company just before the lockdown, but at the same time I'm taking and trying to look at it as just a puzzle.
That's a very good attitude to have. I'm sure this will be challenging times. So really interesting what you're doing. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that you see this as trying to kind of solve a puzzle and looking at it as an agile coach from a human perspective. Now let's get an engineering perspective. YC, you're head of technology. It seems like you have really an engineering background. How did you get into this into technology and why did you choose a career in engineering?
I'll try to answer this, and in the end, I will still come back to my focus day today. Has to do with a story that I gotta tell that has something to do with Z. Anyway, so I started writing code when I was 15 years old. Right, it got me really interested, and that's how I screwed up my high school results. And spending a lot of time building applications since then. Did two startups together with my high school friends, and eventually I landed into Service Rocket to help them to build an engineering team. That's about 7 years ago that I came back to Service Rocket to build a team there. It has been a good journey, but at some point I had a pretty good conversation with Z, who is actually my friend, and because I was looking at my career and asked myself whether I can create a good balance between being good in tech and also being good in helping people to grow. And that night actually got me to go back to my LinkedIn to update and say I suck in coding. Right. So today I put most of my focus in helping people to grow. I have about 7, 8, 9 reports, and they are all leaders in engineering and IT. That's a very good transition coming from being extremely techy to just focusing on people. I hope that tells a bit of my story. How yes, Ben.
It does. It does. Great, and it's a great story. Um, so Andreas, you also have a very kind of interesting story. We've known each other for a couple of years now, and I see you as a digital nomad, as somebody who kind of travels everywhere. Can you share a bit more about how you came into your new role and how you I mean, talk to us a little bit about your career journey.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I see it very similar to Tang sees it. Like, I think the reason why I got into product management is 5 years ago I moved to the Philippines, and I saw a lot of problems in the Philippines, right? So there's a lot of things that don't work, that work very smoothly in Germany, for example, right? Like simple things like going to a print shop and getting stuff printed is like a pain in the ass in the Philippines, for example, right? So there's problems at every corner in a developed country, right? And I kind of got into entrepreneurship at that time. And as a designer, I kind of got into coding. And because I had a bit of a background between design and engineering, it's like, kind of like the perfect mix between product management, right? Product management is like a mix between design and engineering and business. That kind of made sense. And actually, we worked at the same company for a short while, I think, Solarium, right? So that's actually my first role. I kind of got into it very randomly. Like I was just a designer, and then I just took up the opportunity. Basically, someone had to, manage the ship, and that's how I got into it. So it's true. I've been working remotely for about 2 years now, maybe 2.5 years. And the reason why I got into it is because, I think it just offers much better work-life balance. That's my take on it, because you can manage your time much better, and you don't, especially if you work in a city like Manila, for example. We all know the traffic, for example, right? There's a lot of cons that come with it, right? So why would you do it, right? And you can do product management from anywhere.
All right, great. And speaking about working from home and advocating, remote work, Gaze, I believe you're an advocate of remote work. Not only that, women empowerment. Tell us how did you, how did that come about? Why are you advocating for remote work?
All right, so I'll tell you my product management story first, and then we'll go to the remote work lifestyle. So for the product management, I've been into EdTech industry for quite some time. And then I was a trainer before I became a product manager. So I was teaching Apple products and also Microsoft products. So there's a partner training centers here in the Philippines. And I was once a trainer for those training centers. And then eventually, I've seen this opening for product manager in education.ph. And then I was like, oh, at least this is still connected to EdTech, right? Because I feel like it's my passion. So I started from the tech training, and then I moved to product management. And then from there, it excites me because my passion really is about EdTech, and I get to develop more products and more features solving the education problems here in the Philippines and eventually abroad. So that's the reason why I fell in love into like product management. And then during my stay in education.ph, I had the chance to work remotely. And then that's where I realized that, oh, it's actually possible to be a product manager and, you're working remotely. So after that, after my stay in education, I decided that I will be a remote product manager. And I have to agree with Andreas, it really changed my life. And that's the reason why I created a community called Work From Home Pinay.ph. Because number one, I guess I'm more productive now because I get to schedule my whole day. I get to decide what I need to do for the rest of the day. And then another thing for the company, I guess, is that if you will be hiring remote talents, you are not just limited into your location. You can actually hire someone from, let's say, Germany or someone from outside Metro Manila. So that's the reason why I am very into remote setup. And with the technology that we have right now, I guess it's super easy now to implement, to use this technology and to make sure that everything will be working fine as a product manager. So that's my story, and that's why I founded Work From Home Pinay.ph.
All right, great. So let's dive right into it. Let's dive into the topic. So like Andreas and Gaze, you mentioned that as a product manager, you can really work from anywhere, right? So you mentioned that in your work experience, you were given the opportunity to choose the location where you work. Um, was it easy? Did you have to convince someone to give you that privilege, or was it part of the work culture already when you joined? Like how did that come about? Maybe Andreas.
Yeah, sure. Start. So actually, there's two stories here. So the first remote job that I had, I really had a hard time to convincing my boss. I think I worked for mClinica for about half a year remotely, but there was a lot of resistance actually. So eventually, my boss, they really tried to push me back into the office. They really wanted me to be there in the office to manage the people and to manage the process and be able to see exactly what's going on. Being a people manager kind of, right? So often as a product manager, you don't just manage the product and the ideas and the roadmaps and so on. Some product managers also manage the actual process, right? So where do we make mistakes, right? And how can we improve them, right? So that's people management, right? It's kind of like agile coaching as well, right? You focus on how can you improve what the people are doing. So there I had a lot of resistance because the company didn't do remote work. And I guess I was just a very relatively high valued employee. So I think I had the privilege to work remotely there, but it didn't last forever. Now I work for a company that basically is completely remotely, at least on the engineering side. And it's true. It's like we have people from Russia, we have people from Ukraine, from wherever basically. Like if we need to hire someone, we just hire them we put something out on Upwork or remoteok.io. Like we get so many people applying for it. So there's not really any challenges now to convince my boss. Actually, the challenge is more that we as a team are trying to figure out how do we become more efficient as remote people, because we want to become we want to stay remotely. It helps us just get work-life balance, and it just, you can every now and then meet in different places around the world. It's also kind of nice, right? And so it's more about how do we actually become more efficient as a remote team rather than, no, we don't want to be a remote team.
Gaze, like how did how were you able to convince your boss, or when you joined, it was already that privilege was already available when you joined your
Yeah,
organization you work with?
during my stay in Education.ph, we're actually transitioning. So we're moving from one office to the other. So there were days that we needed to work from home or from a coffee shop, or we call it coffees, like coffee shop and office. So we do that before. And then, but now my current company, Edufied, we are 100% remote. So no need to convince our boss, because his mentality is actually, he planned the company that it will be working remote. Everyone will work remotely. So I don't need to do like to convince him, or just the biggest thing that we need to do right now, just like with that, just like what Andreas mentioned, is that to make sure that we are productive and make sure that we are doing our job well, because that's one thing that's actually one of the biggest problem as a remote worker, because there's no one like telling you what to do, and so you have to have the discipline. So yeah, as a team, we need to do that. We need to make sure that we are disciplined enough and we have accountability.
All right. YC, like how do you manage your team? Do you allow people in Service Rocket to work from anywhere? Like how is it the setup there?
Yeah, I will start with myself first. I'm the only guy in Singapore. I moved here about 3 years ago. My team, they are for the engineering and IT, they are in Santiago, Chile, in Sydney, in Kuala Lumpur. I report to the US office. So being able to work remotely and efficiently is very important. We always have this on and off people choosing to work remotely. We have been quite lenient about this, right? Because we understand that there are situations why people prefer to work remotely. There are managers who will choose not to come to office because they just want to have a quiet time on a specific day of a week. There will also be people who stay 2 hours away from the office, and they will only prefer to come to the office once a week. And it has been going okay. But what really supports the communication is the infrastructure. right? About 2 years ago, we moved away from email systems. We shifted to this product created by Facebook called the Workplace. So we have been using that to do chats. We'll be using that to run topics, post for discussions, and we also use it to do live broadcasts. I think that's these three components coming from that particular technology makes connecting people a lot easy. So I would say number one, of course, we have the mindset that we prepare ourselves that people can work remotely. Number two is the technology enables those things.
Right. So I want to dive into the tools and technologies that you use to enable remote work. But before we do that, I wanna hear Z's take on this, because he's an agile coach. So one of the, with agile, with frameworks like Scrum, they talk about people who are agile coaches talk about the importance of having co-located teams to have effective interaction. Like, what's your take on remote work, and how is that an effective way of working in your perspective?
So I think you hit it on the head, right? The point of co-location is actually the interactions, right? And one thing to keep in mind is interactions are easier if you're face-to-face because it's more natural. But then if you look at the younger workforce, younger people, which all of you are, you're digital native, right? I mean, like like my son, he basically grew, was born with a phone in his hand, right? This is like the post-iPhone generation. And one of the things that I noticed is some people interact actually better through digital channels than even face-to-face, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind now with working with a more diverse set of people is preference for interaction. And I mean, when I was first starting out managing teams, I noticed that when I get a group of people in a room, I will be the only one talking. But then when I walk through the workspace, everybody's sending messages on Skype or WhatsApp or whatever. And I realized, like, actually they are interacting, they're just not interacting with me. So that lesson was really critical in actually understanding how people interact, right? And I definitely have changed my views a little bit around co-location. So the way I think about it now is potentially not physical co-location, but definitely psychological, emotional co-location, right? And that's where tools come in. That's where one of the questions in the chat group was, how do you create a sense of belonging? And I think you can do that using digital tools. So just to summarize, it's really to look at the richness of interactions, right? And how do we create that in the digital space?
Right. So that's an interesting perspective, like creating these rich interactions in a digital space. And so I'm going back to you, YC. So you talked about like how implementing Workplace, I think it was, from Facebook was a key enabler of that. So talk about like how you came about choosing Workplace, and what other tools do you use to kind of create these digital interactions.
Yeah, I think before the Workplace came in, we have tried to run an intranet using Atlassian Confluence, and most of the communication happens in Jira, as well as emails. Those two are still around and valid. They serve their purpose. For example, Confluence as a documentation system, you can still use that to communicate minutes and decisions. But when it comes to like what Z mentioned about interactions, right? Especially synchronous or high-speed interactions, I think that's something that emails and perhaps Atlassian products can really help. So I don't remember how exactly Facebook came into the picture. I just know that we started to partner with them to build something, and that is to build on top of the Facebook Workplace. And so we became an early partner to build solutions on top. One example I can give is we built this tool called Safety Officer. so that when there's a disaster, an actual hurricane that happened, right, we can use that to broadcast to the rest of the team members to ensure that they are safe. So anyway, coming back to Facebook Workplace, it is exactly the same like your Facebook, right? Just that it has a different arrangement on certain components. And the good thing about it is the adoption of Facebook Workplace, it was extremely easy because pretty much everyone in the world has been trained how to use Facebook by now. So we use that, I would say that in all forms of types of communication. But the most important one is the leadership support, right? When we move to this, in some way, a cool new thing at that time, the CEO was the person who stepped up and run a CEO group and constantly doing ask me anything sessions with the team. So people feel that the gap between management and the employees are no longer just multiple emails away, right? And you might see your CEO email sometimes, right? But right now, being in that space, in the Facebook Workplace, you can see your CEO updates every single day. And I think that leadership jumping in to drive communication, it changes a lot of things.
Right. So it sounds like you use the tool to really share information across the organization so that people feel connected across the organization. But I'm curious, like Andreas, and I want to pose this question for you because you said you currently work for an organization that's globally distributed. People, I must think majority of the people you said work remotely. But how do you create like rich communication? How do you create healthy relationships? How do you create a cohesive culture when everyone's distributed and far apart? For some of our panelists, at least they work in in the same city or same region. But how does it work in your organization that you're so globally distributed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have to go back a little bit to what Z mentioned earlier, that it's easier if you talk face to face, right? It's just easier to understand each other and discuss certain topics. And I think the struggle that you have when you work remotely is, one, you can often misunderstand each other, of course, just generally in written communication. And also there's just a lack of transparency often, right? So there's a lack of understanding what's going on and a lack of shared understanding of what are we doing, why are we doing things. Being able to keep everyone in the loop is not that easy if you are a remote team, right? Because not everyone is sitting in the same room. So if I make a decision, then someone else might not know what that decision was, right? So it's a bit of a challenge to keep up the shared understanding of what's actually going on in a specific department and what's going on overall with us, right, as a company. That's where tools like Notion, for example, help us a lot. So I really love Notion, for example, for sharing what is happening with the products, release notes and explaining new features and being able to tag people and stuff like that, right? So that everyone has a space where they know, hey, what's actually going on? What am I doing, right? Because not everyone in the company knows what I'm actually busy with, right? So only a few stakeholders really work with me. But what about the other people that don't work with me on a daily basis, right? So that is one thing, just to be able to create some shared understanding and some transparency what's going on. I think that's very much kind of in line with Kanban, the Kanban methodology, and like for example in sprints, right? We do stand-ups, we stand in front of each other just to know what's going on basically in the team, right? And you have to replicate that for an entire organization when you work remotely, basically. So that's one thing, and the other challenge, I guess, is basically I think it's harder to make good connections with people, right? So I just recall my time when I was working in Manila for a company, in Clinica. I was working partly there remotely, but mostly in the office. And it's a different feeling, of course, when you see people every day. You can joke around, you can sometimes take life not so serious. You can take the work not so serious, right? You can joke around and just go out for lunch or whatever, right? You can just take a break sometimes together and do something, right? So this is a problem that you have, of course, when you work remotely. Like, how do we make sure that things actually are fun, right? Because you just see the chat of, discussing whatever, this Jira ticket or this GitHub issue and this pull request, whatever, right? Or this feature, which is boring kind of, right? I mean, there's not that much fun in the sense of like taking a bit of the work out of the work, right? that's a challenge that honestly we haven't 100% figured out yet. We're probably thinking of maybe exploring activities that we can do online. Like obviously a lot of coders, a lot of engineers, a lot of tech people are nerdy. We play online games, for example, whatever, right? I mean, what are activities that people enjoy that you can actually do online? But it's definitely a work in progress for us.
Right. Guys, so you manage. So you're a product manager. So Andreas mentioned like sometimes it feels like work, right? It's not so fun managing backlog tickets and prioritizing things remotely. Like how do you manage that? How are you able to communicate clearly to your team if you're working remotely, the priorities, what needs to get done, context around the specific requirement? How do you do it?
Yeah, so we use Zoom. We do lots of meetings, and then we also do the daily scrum. So every day we still do the daily scrum, and then we also do sprint planning. And then every time we start a sprint planning, we have a little games, and then we'll play like icebreakers, we'll play online games, and then not really online games, like an online icebreaker to get to know each other since we're working remotely. And then we also have our anything under the sun channel. That's for the water coolers. So if ever we need to share something like the latest Netflix or whatever it is outside work, we do it there so that we can still have fun while we are working and to feel like we are still co-located. And then recently we implemented the coffee minute. So it's like a 15 minutes break wherein you can just say, oh, I'll just have a coffee minute with Gaze, and then we can just talk about anything that we want. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 10 minutes, as long as it won't last more than 15 minutes. So yeah, it's like an open space where you can just discuss anything. And then in terms of like making sure that everybody understands the requirements, the user stories, the mockups, everything, we record everything so that because we're working with two different time zones, we have India, we have Singapore, and we have Philippines. So we record everything, and then we see to it that if ever you will not be around during the meeting, you have to watch that. You have to watch that recording so that you'll understand, and then you also have to share your thoughts so that everybody can give their ideas. And we want to build a community or an organization wherein we hear all of the stakeholders. Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. Yeah. So that's what we do. And then we also practice asynchronous communication. So, for example, we have a team members based in India, right? So what I will do is, instead of waiting for him for another 2 hours, I'll list down every question that I have, all of the details that I need, and then once he's online, he can easily reply to me and then clear whatever it is that the question that I asked him, or yeah, just and then every end of the day, we call it a daily update. So before you log out, you have to tell us what you've done and then if you have any blockers. So once you send that, it's like a notification for the rest of the team members that you're done for the day, and we made sure that we're not disturbing you during your rest day, during your off hours. So we'll just talk to you again the next day.
All right, great. So that sounds like a very so I like that you said you record things, because we had a question in Slido, like how do you manage working across different time zones? So you mentioned you make sure you record meetings, you have practices so that you can still meet asynchronously. So even though people are asleep or people work at different times, they can still sync up. So I'm curious, YC, like how about you? Like you mentioned that what are the practices that you kind of adopted in your organization? Make sure people are productive and engaged.
Yep. I will try to give 3 points, 3 answers. Number one is a tweet coming from Udi Zulio. He tweeted this a while back, and he talked about, if someone on your team is working remotely, you are working remotely. and I have always been using that to remind my team members, right? You could have a squad of 6 people, and then one person working remotely, but a lot of team members using face-to-face communication to make decisions that will make that person who work remotely totally left out. So as soon as you have one single person in your team is working remotely, you will need to change your practice so that it's inclusive. So now coming to my second point is very similar with what Gaze mentioned. We make sure that most of the meetings are recorded so that we can rebroadcast it to our workplace and people can rewatch it again. And the third point that I can share is one thing that as a leader like me who work across too many time zones, we are kind of like the glue people to ensure that the communication in the organization doesn't get stuck or falls into the crack. So sometimes I will have to run duplicate sessions just to make sure that important messages are being brought across. Otherwise, one technique that we use is called a slot. For a recurring event, we will use slot A, B, or C. Right, and then we try to look at all the time zones that will, all the offices that will fall, that have to participate in this meeting. We look at how all this time zone overlaps. Then we create 3 optimum time slots, and then we rotate the time slots, be it every once a month or every once a quarter. So that way, we in some way we try to ensure that events like that. So, for example, a sprint retrospective. Right, events like that that unfortunately have some people being distributed will be able to execute it and sustain.
All right, great. Z, I want to ask you, like, so the one question that came in through Slido was how can the transition be managed? Like, how can the transition from, let's say, a team that's predominantly like co-located to being remote, to now being remote, especially in the situation now? I wonder if you have experience with that, especially since you've coached a lot of teams. How can that be managed? How can that transition be managed? What are your thoughts on that? Z, I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think first of all, hello, Eldon. I think that's his question on Slido. So it's interesting, yes. So in my last place, we had 4 development sites, right? 2 in Malaysia, 1 in Hong Kong, 1 in Shenzhen, and we started working with teams and people in Australia as well, right? So we've even had one team where they had people from 5 different locations. So while we wanted to co-locate as much as possible, we knew that going forward in a kind of globalized world, it's increasingly more difficult to do. And one of the things that we had to learn was to be very mindful that there are people not in the room when you're having conversations or you're making decisions. And very much echoing what Andres Gaze and YC kind of touched on is really a question of including people in a team. So as long as you are conscious that people are included, and that would be picking up habits like, hey, there's somebody on the call, right? So let's make sure we have one conversation at a time, make sure that we're loud and clear, make sure that we are speaking in a language that everybody can understand, right? So myself as a manager or team coach, sometimes I'll just remind my team and says, hey, there's somebody in Australia, so you'll appreciate it if we spoke in a language that everybody can understand and clearly. It would also be to document things where they need to be documented, like decisions, for instance. And anyway, what YC said, it was just to create regular cadences where people got together, right? Even leading up to what's happening with COVID-19, we have already created cadences where people would have a town hall where all 4 sites would dial in at once, right? Over Zoom, for instance, or to catch up remotely, either Slack or Zoom or chat, on a regular basis. So I think it's more about, even if you're setting up a new team or you're transitioning one, is really to be aware that there are people everywhere, and then just making sure that we're including everybody when it matters.
in a remote setup, Z, just going back to you, does the cadence of meetings, because somebody's asking in Slido, does the cadence of meetings is it any different when you're co-located versus when people are remote?
I would say as we tend to under-communicate, right? So especially in a distributed team, in a distributed setting, you're not going to have the, hey, I bumped you in the hallway, or let's go for lunch, or hey, let's get coffee together moments, right? So it's just very conscious that you have to schedule those in. So for me, when I'm managing my remote team members, I will have at least a once a week catch up. If it's someone in the same location as I am, I'll have maybe once in every 2 weeks, for instance. So the more remote my team members are, the more frequently I schedule something just to catch up with them. And going to what Gay said is, usually these catch-ups have no agenda. They're really open, but it's the time for my team member to just tell me what's going on. And sometimes it will be, hey, I'm having this problem. Can you help me solve it? I'm like, sure. Or sometimes it's just, hey, I'm having, let's just talk about status updates if they want to, or career development. And I find sometimes, because if it's so open, my team members will say, hey, I'm actually finding it very hard to focus at work right now because my son's out of school, and he wants me to be home and I don't know what to do. So the whole no agenda thing is amazing because it just allows anything and everything to surface. And especially as a manager, which most of you are, that's where a lot of the focus is to really manage the well-being for people in your team.
YC, going back to you, like, how do you, especially in the situation now because of COVID-19, people I'm sure are very, very stressed. Like, how do you make sure people are kind of in a healthy mental state? How do you do it in your organization? YC, I think
yeah, I will probably share 2 points. Number one is at a day-to-day basis, I do about 3 to 6 calls. 3 of these calls are engineers. I engage with engineers a lot, although they are not directly reporting to me. And like what Z said, this kind of meetings are usually non-agenda kind of meeting, right? Casual chattings with the engineers just to find out how have they been, what are they doing. So during this COVID time, I find that connecting with them become a lot more crucial, right? People are sitting at home, they could be bored. For example, there's one guy who told me this whole experience made him to rethink, right? What kind of a big change he should make in his life. Whether he should change his career direction, right? There's another manager yesterday who told me about he's planning to move to another country instead. So things like an event like this makes people to rethink their life, and I think it's important to connect with them and then find out how you can help them. So I think a day-to-day connection with the engineers has become is an important advice that I would share with you. The second one is casually, I also run a daily huddle. So every day at 3:30, I will set up, hey, anyone can dial in. This like an open space. Say anything you like. Tell us what's your favorite breads, what a toaster you are using at home. Do you like to drink? What kind of drinks you like? So we do that for like 30 minutes or so. And we broadcast the link to join the call to everyone in the company. This Friday, I plan to do a remote happy hours with the team. It's a Good Friday, and I've stocked up with some drinks. So I intend to do that to them. So these 2 techniques.
All right. So those are really good techniques to get people engaged and motivated. Gaze, how about getting people productive? As a product manager, at the end of the day, product managers are measured on return on investment, right? People have to be productive, even even in an unfortunate situation like this. At the end of the day, especially if you're in a product development organization, you still have to crank out product. How do you keep people productive and focus on the goal, especially in today's environment? Gaze?
Yeah, I guess this is also applicable to office-based teams. I think the first thing that we need to do is to explain to the rest of the team why we are doing it, like explaining to them what's the reason behind it so that they know. And then also the consequences if we will not be delivering all of this, let's say, deliverables for, let's say, Friday, so that there's an accountability. So that's one thing that I do. And then in terms of like productivity, we as a company, we make sure that we, before being remote first, we are people first. So we set one-on-ones to one-on-one sessions so that we understand if there's any blockers, let us know. So we are very flat when it comes to like hierarchy. So even the founder, even the everyone can just talk to each other and you can just clear whatever it is that is blocking you right now so that we can help you. And we encourage it. We encourage the team to do it almost every day. Like we keep on reminding them. And if something is, let's say, something is not solvable, then we think of ways how we can go about it. What are our options? And then in terms of like measuring the productivity, we do it every end of the sprint. So we do retrospective, and then we talk about, what are the things that we can improve and what are the learnings, and then we try to apply those learnings and improve the situation as we go along. So first of all, I think it's really difficult to manage a remote team. I guess everybody would agree with that. And but it's doable. You just need to make sure that the communication line is always open, and make the people understand what it is that you need to do, what it is that you need to deliver, and why you have to do it, so that they would know the consequences. And those answers or those information would help them to be more productive. I guess that's how we do it in our company.
All right, great. Andreas, I wanted to ask you, like, so you have a lot of experience working remotely, working with a distributed team. What are the things that are just impossible to do in a remote setup? Like I'm thinking, like, are there things about the product development or product management process which is impossible or all that much harder to do when people are working remotely? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, just something I'm struggling with right now that I can really see is probably our biggest struggle right now for us as a company. I have a background in UX, right? So I moved from UX UI into product. So what's very common is obviously when you build products is you have to do prototypes, right? You have to, come up with assumptions and then test them quickly, right? As lean as possible, do multiple iterations and prototypes and get user feedback, get feedback from stakeholders. And that's obviously much, much easier if you're just sitting in a room with someone and you're standing in front of a whiteboard and you just have a pen in your hand. You can come up with ideas really, really quickly, right? Like you can come up with different product versions with a few sketches in like an hour session, right? So it's very easy to gather feedback from stakeholders. If you do it remotely, it's much harder because, just for example, I mean, it's not that easy to draw decent stuff. The sketches don't need to be very decent usually, but I think most people don't have a very, smooth hand when they draw something with their mouse. So doing some quick prototypes with people on something like Miro or something like that, a tool where you can whiteboard, it's not that easy, right? So it's much easier to just go and stand in front of a whiteboard and quickly take a pen and draw something, right? So that's one of the things. Something that's also specifically hard for us as a team is gathering customer feedback. It's not as easy as it used to be for me before. I think that's partly a little bit because we have different languages. So our company does not just serve English-speaking customers. So we currently primarily serve Danish customers. So they speak Danish, and I don't speak Danish as a product manager. So it's a bit of a challenge. How do you get the feedback in the right way, right? Obviously, it would be best if you can see the feedback yourself, right, and analyze it very quickly, right? So that's a bit of a challenge if you have a company that works in multiple countries and people from different countries, so that not everyone understands the language that's actually spoken by your customers. And honestly, we haven't figured out the solution for that yet. I'm actually even considering to just learn Danish to solve that problem.
All right. And this is a question for anyone. Is managing remote workers any different if they're like a full-time employee or a contractor or a third party? Is it any different or is it the same? Anyone want to take that question? What if the remote team is a contractor, freelancer, or
Yeah, I can take that question. We do have a mix between fully employed engineers, and then we also every now and then have freelancers that either just come in for like one project for like a few weeks maybe, or sometimes we just get people that are freelancers and they work part-time, so they're not really the core team basically, right? So they don't know the entire product, I would say we don't really treat people that much differently if we deal with freelancers. I think the difference is just how accustomed is the person with the product, right? So if you take in freelancers that just work on a project for like 2 months, or they only work with your company for let's say, they only work 4 hours a day, yeah, so part-time basically, then it's a bit of a, they don't know everything. They don't need to be involved with everything. They don't need to be involved with every meeting, right? They don't need to necessarily even sometimes be part of certain stand-ups, right? So we can just let them do their thing, right? So obviously, but if they're the core team, then you want to make sure that, they are always involved in all the meetings, in all the discussions, in all the technical discussions. But we try to, basically, you don't want to involve people into stuff that they don't need to be involved in, right? So if you can keep people out of something like freelancers, they don't need to know the entire process, they don't need to know the entire product. You just need to connect them with the people who know that part of the product, right? And they then help to manage their expectations and their understanding of what they need to get done.
Yeah, and just to add, what we usually do is we have core hours. So we make sure that if whatever, for example, you have a freelancer or a third party team, we make sure that it's part of the contract that there should be an overlap, so that we could still talk to them, and then every end of the day they would send us a daily report so we know what's happening.
All right. Z, question for you, and this came in through Slido. As an agile coach, how do you make sure that the team is still being effective and productive? How do you measure it, especially when people are remote and distributed? How do you do it?
So one of the biggest shifts in measuring team productivity in the last few years is to measure less about activities and more about outcomes. So I guess my thinking here is, how do we know if a team is performing, right? Is it a team's really busy, like 9 to 5 every day, or is it a team that's kind of cranking out thousands of lines of code a day, or is it a team that's able to serve or solve some customer problem? So it's along those lines that I would frame the answer is the only way to tell whether a team is performing or not is how the velocity of solving problems, right? So traditional metrics like number of story points or number of lines of code written or number of wireframes done is not so effective in actually understanding customer issues. So to summarize, right, I would probably measure along the lines of the ability for the team to solve problems by answering a question of things like, how might we do this for the customer, or how could the customer do X, Y, and Z, and then measure that instead. The only caveat to that would be like bug fixes. I find bug fixes are a lot easier to measure, right? Like, hey, a team's fixing $10 a month versus $30 a month. That's very much easier to measure.
All right. Okay.
Oh, and just to add,
Yep.
because this is a product meetup, product managers probably care a lot more about solving customer problems and giving new value to the customer than lines of code written and number of wireframes drawn. Right.
So it's really looking at the outcomes, right? Like if they've solved a problem for a customer and how much value they've added to the organization, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. YC, so I have a question for you. So how have things changed for your team pre-COVID and now with the current crisis? How have things changed? Have the dynamics changed a bit in how things are done in Service Rocket?
Yeah, despite us being a company that with a lot of people working from different locations and being used to remote culture, is inevitable. It's inevitable that people are definitely affected by this whole event, right? Including myself. In Singapore, this is the second day of lockdown. If you ask me, does it change my mood? It certainly does. When I connect with people, a lot of people actually feel that this entire event, it has two contributions to them. Number one is it makes them to be more connected to their team members. This was very surprising. People feel that by doing this remote working, they actually feel more connected. I think maybe the check-in frequency has become less disruptive, but more productive. Another thing that they talk about is it also make them to work more productively because now they get a better space for themselves. So I would say, and to echo one of the question from the list, is one common response that I've heard from a lot of people is people do miss going back to work to see each other. I think people like to touch each other's face. But otherwise, to us, I don't think it affected our operations, but it affected how people it affected people emotionally, and it also in some way do connect people a little bit closer in a very surprising way that I didn't expect at all.
Gaze, how about in your organization? How has the dynamics changed with the COVID crisis?
Yeah, that's a very good question, by the way. We have more than 5 offices globally, but the first office that has gone into a lockdown was Kuala Lumpur. And the one very important thing the CEO did was on the same night that the Prime Minister in Malaysia announced the lockdown, the CEO did a workplace live broadcast to assure everyone in the team that the company will support them. So we send out survey. We ask people what are those things that we can support them for, right? We make our expense claim requirements linear. For example, people feel that now that the electricity bill goes higher, right? Can I put that into my expense claim? So we make that allowance less stringent, and we also gave salary in advance, right? But these items are not the key part. The key part is how leadership step in to ensure that the entire mood is positive, right? So that people still feel motivated to go to work. People know that we have got their back, right? If they have a problem, they can come to us. And then otherwise, I would say business as usual, but we make sure that emotionally, financially, people are supported. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Gaze, how about you? How has things changed? How have things changed in your organization? How has things changed for you personally?
So for the team, we are more connected because maybe people are opening up more, and we are discussing just like what YC mentioned. Like surprisingly, the team is more vocal about the needs, about the whatever they're feeling, and the management also made sure that we can help them with whatever they need. The direction, of course, there are some changes in the priorities because we need to analyze the market as well, especially in the education market. Things change, so we need to do some tweaking with the priorities. But business as usual. We are still doing our day-to-day job. And in terms of like, I guess the major thing that really changes the communication line. So every day we have for example, in our group, we have a Filipino team, right? So every day we ask each other, how are you doing? How's the lockdown? Do you have enough food? Do you have enough water? Do you have electricity? Do you have any problems with your internet connection? What can we do? So we try to be more connected with each other, and we try to be more feel like the management and the whole team is there, and we would help you in any way, in any form that we can. Personally, it's really difficult. Even though we are used to working remotely, obviously the morale will change. You'll see the news, you'll see the social media updates, and it will definitely affect you. But just like what we always say, things should still move on. We still need to go on and make sure that we deliver what we need to deliver, so that when this is all over, we can, there's a better day coming in, and we can all continue. And we are just very hopeful that this will end soon and we can continue with our lives.
Andreas, has this crisis changed the strategy in your organization, the product strategy, the roadmap? How is it affecting how you think about the product in your organization?
Yeah, so it has impacted us in a few ways. One interesting thing, just to quickly mention, is actually our sales department, which was the only department that was not remote. It switched to remote, obviously, and they actually became more efficient with making sales and getting deals closed. So that's kind of interesting. But I think the main thing that really changed was the strategy. Yeah, so I have to attribute that a lot to obviously our management and our board. So we as a startup, for example, we are a seed-funded startup, and we were of course shooting for the next funding round, so Series A, somewhere probably Q1 next year, roughly, right? But obviously now there's a lot of challenges with what is going to happen with our customers, what's going to happen with us, how do we sustain all our employees, right? We wanted to actually grow more employees. So we basically adjusted our roadmap to say, okay, we're no longer a growth-focused startup right now. We're kind of conservative. Let's improve the product that we have. Let's work on the things that we currently have and new things that we wanted to do for growth to raise a Series A, such as going to other countries, for example, and making sure our app works for different countries, different languages, different regulations for different countries, things like that. We're basically scaling all that down. And essentially, the first thing that our management did was we had an all-hands meeting where we were ensured, okay, this is our new strategy. We're kind of scaling down how fast we want to grow to ensure, you're all safe. We had to we soon have to let go of one employee, unfortunately, but everyone else is basically safe, right? And I think that's very assuring for people to know that, okay, sure, there's COVID and there's a lot of crises, but currently we're still okay, and we're just scaling down our strategy a little bit, and you can keep your job and keep on doing things as you've been doing for the most part.
All right. So let's have a quick lightning round before we pick off some of the remaining questions in Slido. So here, I'm just going to ask a question and give me just a quick answer. So we'll start with YC. Top 3 things you miss about working at the office.
I haven't been working in the office for maybe 3 years by now, but I still visit offices. I do miss my colleagues. That's one thing, right? Then second thing is the food. I travel across different offices, different locations. I have different kind of food that I really like about. I can't think of the third thing, but I try to share. So I share too. I try my best.
All right, great. Z, top 3 things about what that you miss working at the office.
Coffee chats. I would say coffee chats. Like that's I haven't found anything that still replicates bumping into someone and just having a really good 5-minute chat.
All right. Gaze, top 3 things you miss working at the office.
Colleagues, lunch break, and karaoke night.
All right. Andreas.
Yeah, the same problem. I barely remember working in an office. So that's an interesting question. But I think the thing that I miss the most is just silly games, actually. So socializing. that's definitely something that I miss the most. You just can't like whatever play dart or something. Have a coffee break, something like that, right? Just go out for lunch or whatever. That's the thing that I miss the most. Aside from that, I honestly wouldn't know. I appreciate not being in the office most of the time, actually.
All right, great. All right, the next round. Top 3 tools that you use to be productive while working remotely. Let's start with Z. Top 3 tools.
Miro, or used to be called real-time board, now called Miro. That's one tool. Email, so I use email a lot. Slack.
All right. YC? Same question?
Google Keeps. I have tried different tools to keep track of my to-dos. I've tried Google Sheet. I've tried Evernote. I've tried using Post-it notes. I find that Google Keeps is the simplest. So I rely on Google Keeps a lot to keep track of what I need to do every day. Workplace, that's where I do all my communication, ensure that functions, executives, everyone is connected with the things I'm doing. Jira, we use Jira a lot, not just to file bugs. We use Jira for too many things. But that's where it's the source of truth of where work is at for our company.
All right. Andreas, top 3 tools?
Yeah, I'm also starting to use Miro. I think that's really helpful for us to just get quicker feedback and just draw some simple ideas and share, do a brain dump online. It's very useful. I also really love Notion. It's just great to be able to share everything. It's just everyone automatically is informed of what's going on. Like they see updates or I can tag people. That's pretty cool. Adobe XD is also really awesome. So Adobe XD, for anyone who doesn't know, that's a design software from Adobe, like a UI software. And they've really invested heavily in collaboration features in the last, 1.5 years or so. You can really tell that it's becoming much, much better to work with multiple people on designs and get design feedback and hand it over to engineers. It's really awesome.
Gaze? Top 3 tools?
Miro, Confluence, and Matrix.
All right. Okay. And then final question, and before we pick off some more questions, Slido, what's your top advice for someone who's just starting to work remotely, somebody's new to this? Andreas, you're a remote veteran. What's your advice?
I think I would probably say try to over-communicate a little bit. I think the challenge that you have when you work remotely is sometimes you might not actually be aware of what you're doing wrong. So like sometimes you work on something, whatever it is, a project or I don't know, some deadline, and the deadline approaches, and then you hand it over to some person after like a week or whatever your deadline is, and then you get feedback, right? And maybe you totally did it the wrong way, right? So there's always kind of a little bit of a delay if you work remotely, unless you over communicate and try to communicate all the time, because unlike with the office, it's very often it just happens you work on something and you actually don't have scheduled to talk about something, but somehow it just happens that you talk about what you're working on and you get feedback in the process, right? But if you work remotely, it's often that you're just sitting in front of your laptop and just doing your work, but you're not considering other people's feedback, and that might impact you along the road. So I always try to get feedback sooner. Actually, that's something that we're trying to improve right now a lot on our feedback process. I think that's probably our worst part where we do it. Like we don't get our feedback soon enough. And I think that's important. You have to over communicate with your team as much as possible, even though that feels weird at the beginning, for sure. It's really weird if you tell them everything that you're doing and everything that you have planned, but otherwise you might be working on the wrong things, basically.
All right. Z? Advice for new guys?
Remember to wear pants.
Good one.
I know that's going around now with people not wearing clothes and pants. I've been in a call once where the person's camera accidentally came on and he was shirtless. So, so just taking it further, like even if you're working from home, dress up as though you're going to work, right? Create a workspace. Treat it as a separate space from everything else. Dress up. You're going to go to work, and just going to create a routine around work, so that when you leave work, you're still at home, but then you can actually shake it off. Shake off the JN, change your clothes, and just check out for a while.
All right. YC, what's your advice?
I try to keep it short. All right. I'll try to use my day-to-day to make such recommendation. Number one, you need to have a straight schedule, right? You need to know when you start and when you stop. I try to wake up early. I wake up about 5:50 every day. I will do a shower. Not all the time, but most of the time. I went by the Tim Ferriss approach. Start with a warm shower and then end with a cold shower. It totally wakes you up. Then I will start doing my breakfast. On the webcam, make sure that you have that slider to block your webcam. Sometimes you do make mistakes. That's very important. Close your door, your bedroom, so that you won't go in. Like what Z said, dress up. I gave this advice to my high school friends just a few days ago. They laughed at it, which is comb yourself, groom, looks good, put on perfume. Even though you are just at home, no one else smelling it, but you can feel it. That's what I do. I always put on perfume even though I'm at home. So I run 2 shifts. I do a morning shift. Then about 3 or 4 p.m. I will stop. Then I might continue either around 8, 9 p.m. or I will continue around 2 or 4 a.m. So that's because of the people that I connect with. But the 2 shift is very important because if you ask me what's the most important advice, you must get out. You need to go somewhere. You don't want to stay at home for too long. But of course, if you're under a lockdown situation, or for the case like Singapore, you can still go out just to pack your food. So try to run 2 shifts. It will prevent you to sit there for 8 hours, and then it will affect your mental health.
All right. And Gaze, what's your advice?
Yeah, so I guess the reality is working from home is really not easy, but you have to be disciplined so that it's tempting to just stay in your bed and then work from your bed. But you have to have a dedicated office space, and you have to train your mind that if you're in that area, you're actually working, so that when it's time to when you're there, you're working, and then once you're done. And when to step out that area, it's time for you to rest. It's time for you to be with your family and with your loved ones. And then you just need to realize that even though you're working from home, you are still working. So you're just changing the environment. And then don't forget to stretch. Don't forget to walk around, even just for like 5 minutes, because it will definitely help you to keep the blood flowing and refresh your mind.
All right, great, excellent advice. All right, so really appreciate everyone's time. So this was really interesting conversation as expected. There is one more question that I'd like to get to in Slido, which I think very interesting. So the question was, do you do synchronous meetings first, then asynchronous follow-up meetings, or do you asynchronous like communication first, then asynchronous meetings to, I guess, clarify? How do you do it in your organizations? Maybe let's start with Z.
So I don't quite understand the context of the question, but I'll take a guess. So the way I think about it is, if you have 2 people or a group of people who are trying to work together, who may not have the shared understanding, definitely sync first, right? Get the conversation going, get the feedback loops, and then follow it up with the async information to record down what was actually discussed and agreed to. That's really important, especially for people not in the room or maybe joining after. And then just be very clear to keep track of any action items, to-dos, questions, and answer them either sync or async. Yeah, but I'll definitely start sync first to create a shared understanding.
Andreas, do you agree? What's your take?
Yeah, for the most part. I guess the way that we run it is we go a little bit async first, just to get like the basics out of like what are we actually trying to achieve, what do you want to talk about, so people actually get a rough understanding of what's going on. And then usually what happens is we realize, okay, we need to get more into the details and actually have a call about it. And then again we go back to async usually, and that works pretty well for us. But I think it's very similar to just starting with sync, like having a sync meeting first. I'm not sure if the difference would be that different if you just start with async first and then have the sync. I think it's just a matter of you shouldn't keep if you do async first in the beginning, you should keep it relatively short. I think just to establish some quick details and then realize, oh, we need to talk about this in person, and then have a sync meeting.
YC, what are your thoughts on this?
This is a tricky question because it also depends on the group, or it's a one-on-one setting. And when it comes to one-on-one, when you are reaching out to a specific person, that person could also be coming from a different time zone. So usually I will drop that message to the person and to let them know that, hey, this is just to prepare you for another message that I'll put into Jira, right? So very short sync, but then things is going to be kept async. And then when we really come to the point that we need to make decision, I think that's when you do a sync. So I would say async first, therefore, because that way it's not disruptive. You are not waking up someone. You're trying to be respectful. And I think under a team setting, I would say it's also async first. You do not want everyone to jump into a call too easily. I think async provides you the freedom to focus on your current tasks and also to prepare for the information and ramp up on the context. So async first, then sync.
And Gaze, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, same. We do async first. So we give a heads up and then we gather all of the information. And once it's finalized, we do the sync so that we broadcast so that everybody will understand the requirements or what needs to be done.
All right, excellent. Okay, so that I think brings us to the close. I think we covered many of the Slido questions, if not all of it. How about any closing thoughts? Just a quick summary or any closing thoughts that you'd like to share. I'll start with ladies first. Gaze, any quick thoughts, parting words?
I guess my take would be, don't be afraid to work remotely. It's possible, even if you're a product manager. I've been doing this for 4 years already. It's not easy, but it's possible. There are lots of tools that can help you. There are lots of resources. There's Andreas who can help you. You can message me, you can message him, and then there's a community that you can always ask if there's any questions about working remotely. So don't be afraid to work remotely. It's an option for you. It's not for everyone, but it's an option for you. And I hope someday, I guess it's a trend. It's not just a trend. I guess it won't slow down anytime soon, especially with what's happening right now. So yeah. And thank you for having me.
Great. Andreas, any closing thoughts, closing words?
Yeah, I think the thing that really changed for me recently is that I've been a digital nomad for 2 years or so, and basically full-time remote now for a year. But it has changed a little bit for me with COVID now. It's like you don't go out at all anymore, and it's easy to just lose yourself in work. So one thing that I really focus on now is to really have a very strict timeline of personal things that I do. I have a fixed time every day that I do a HIIT workout in the morning, and I have a fixed time in the evening that I do yoga. And I don't care what's going on. Nobody at the office ever has time for that. So otherwise, I would just go crazy basically right now. Yeah. Aside from that, yeah, thanks for having me as well. Maraming salamat sa lahat.
Walang anuman. Thank you as well. YC, any closing thoughts?
Yes. This COVID thing is unlike a lot of things that we have seen. It affected people's life a lot. And one thing I have been sharing with my team is I feel very thankful that we are still in tech, right? We are in tech and we still can keep our job. A lot of people out there, it's not easy for them to conduct such activities anymore. That include my partner, that include my father. I think this is a good time to reconnect with some of the people. If you feel that you have neglected your family members or your closest friends, I think it's a good time. I was very surprised that 2 days ago I managed to jump in a call to talk to my high school friends. right? Or in a Zoom call. That have never happened in the last 30 plus years. So that's that's how I'm feeling. I think everyone have their own personal story and journey. Hopefully you are handling yours very well. I'm a very friendly person. If whoever would like to stay in touch, you can always reach out to me. I can talk about anything. I'm sure a lot of the people in this call as well, in the panelists, they are also reachable. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much, YC. And Z, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things with the whole current COVID situation is forcing us to think about being more intentional with our actions and our time. Like YC, my fiance is in Singapore, I'm in Malaysia. We don't know when we're going to see each other again. But then it just makes us more mindful in how we spend time with each other. And I think it's the same thing in the workplace, right? Now that everybody's distributed, how do we intentionally not take for granted the things that we got used to, like just having that person there that you can go talk to. I think in the long run, working remote has been a trend for a while. I think COVID-19 is just accelerating it. And I think for the kind of the future worker, right, it's just another skill to pick up. Like, how do I be a good, effective team member in an office and at home, right? And even when I was previously working in the office, I would go to office, take my laptop, and go to Starbucks or a coffee shop and work there for half a day because I wanted the peace and quiet, right? So I think it's just another thing to learn to stay relevant in the workforce. And thanks for having me too.
All right. Thank you very much, Z. So okay, so that wraps up our inaugural and historic first session on that's purely online. Again, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us tonight, for taking the time, and for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. So really appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of our members will get a lot of value from this session today. So just very quickly, so if you're watching this, obviously you're already a member of our Facebook group. So please continue to watch and monitor some. So we're trying to come up with more virtual events in the future. Hopefully, after COVID-19, after this crisis has passed, we'll resume our regular meetup so we can meet face to face and kind of share and bond. In a shared environment. So also join our meetup page at meetup.com/productph. So that's it. So thank you very much for joining, and hope to see you in our next session. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all. Have a good evening.
Yeah.